Clear was always going to be a tool to help people figure out which products to use and whether they were working. These are the problems I identified. But obviously the form of that solution is what iterates, because there is no market leading skincare app. So there's no obvious feature set that we can just copy and paste and we know it's going to take off. You have to do that, long process of talking to people, analyzing the metrics.
Breaking rules is how we grow. No limits, no
Ahana, I am so incredibly honored to have this time with you today and to get to know more about you and what you're building with Clear. I have to say, I've been following you on LinkedIn and have developed somewhat of a girl crush on you. I have been perusing and seeing your social media, and I feel delighted to know you in the social media sense, and I'm excited to get to know you even more today on the podcast. So first, let's just tell everyone a little bit about Ahana and what you do and what you've built.
Thank you. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be here chatting with you, Olivia, and I appreciate it. And vice versa, by the way. I'm a big fan of your posts on social media too. So my name's Ahana. I'm the founder and CEO of Clear. We're a Y Combinator-backed beauty tech company. So we have a free app that helps people figure out which skincare products to use and whether they are actually working. I started the company almost 5 years ago now, which still feels very surreal to say. And I started when I was doing my physics degree at Imperial College London. During that time, I started my degree thinking I would pursue academia, ended up trying out a bunch of different internships in software engineering, also in investment banking, and sort of found my passion for startups and entrepreneurship by accident in my third year of uni. But that was a real turning point where I knew that as somebody with a technical skill set, but also just an interest in solving problems and applying my knowledge, my background, my education to these real world challenges, I felt entrepreneurship is how I could have the best impact. And when it came to building Clear, I thought to myself, how many skincare enthusiasts are also software engineers that want to solve problems in this massive industry where there actually has been comparatively little innovation and therefore so much room for opportunity to innovate. So hence, I made the jump. YC were the first investors into the company, and I'm extremely grateful for that investment. I think, to put it quite crudely, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you about my company had they not been the first in. I think fundraising was a real eye-opening experience, and just the whole world of investors and venture capital, especially not coming from that background. But, they were the first to bite, so to speak. And then, from there raised a bit more funding. Grew the team a little bit, and I think I'm now at the point where I feel more than anything just gratitude that I get to call this my job. Of course, it's not without its challenges, as I'm sure you know, but overall feel super lucky to do what I love, to be building a company that's so close to my heart as someone that's suffered from skin issues for so many years. But there's still a long road ahead of us and still lots of learnings to be had.
Yeah. Thank you, Ahana, for that. I love all of the parts of your journey, and I'm excited to dive into them more. From the very beginning, I have looked into why you kind of started Clear, and I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about the inception of the idea and why you did this and why you created something that is focused on trying to help women and others uncover the challenges with their skin.
Yeah, so for me, my battle with my skin started from about the age of 12 when I first got my first pimple. I grew up in a family where nobody suffered with skin issues. My mum and dad had flawless skin. I have a younger brother. This is quite mean to say, hoping that he would experience some of my shared trauma during his teen years, but he has the most beautiful skin I've ever seen. And so nobody around me really understood the problems that I was having. But for me, I just really, from the age of 12, always suffered with acne. Now, separate to my skin troubles, my family and I also moved around growing up. So I was raised mostly in the UK, in a place called Cheshire in the Northwest until I was 14 years old. And then we moved to New Delhi, to India. And that was a huge transition. which sparked a lot of things. And I think in some ways also is what sparked that more entrepreneurial spirit and wanting to use my education to solve problems. But when it came to my skin, it meant that I was suddenly in a new health system with a new doctor, a new dermatologist. And then again, 2 years later, we moved from New Delhi to Singapore. So again, the medical system changed. There was no communication between those doctors. Then I finished school in Singapore at the age of 18, moved to the UK, now in a new health system. And I ended up being put on the same medications that I already knew weren't working for me over and over and over again. And being the kind of person that I am, I was growing very frustrated with the doctors for almost, it wasn't their fault because my information wasn't on their systems. But I already knew that what I was being prescribed wasn't going to work. And I'd actually been taking pictures of my skin and just storing them in Google folders. And I had spreadsheets saying, these are the medications I've tried, these are the products I've tried, these are the dosages I've been on, and what was the result? Did it help or did it not help? And by the time I was in my third year of university, a third year going into my fourth year, actually, which is roughly when Clear started, I just thought to myself, I have an app to track my period, my diet, my fitness. Why do I still use all these spreadsheets to track my skincare routine? And more importantly, why am I taking skincare advice from these nameless, faceless strangers on Reddit, which, to be fair, did support me for many, many years. And I think community is a really big part of what we do because you need people with you on that journey, especially if you're somebody like me who the people in your life don't understand what it's like to have these problems. But I thought there has to be a better way of figuring out what to use in the first place as well. And one of the big problems with this industry is that it is so heavily marketed. It's so reliant on, methods like influencer marketing where somebody's being paid to promote a product. It's quite unethical because you are preying on the insecurities of mostly young women like myself. Because of my skin problems, all those years of adventure I had in India and in Singapore, I didn't let my family take pictures of me because I was so self-conscious of how my skin looked. And I just think back to that. That's so sad that I don't have those memories of my teenage years because I thought that what I was experiencing was so abnormal and so horrific to look at. And the few pictures that were taken, it's the last thing that anyone else would notice about them. And so I think that there's a lot of predatory behavior in the industry, and there's also much less data and science than I would like to see. And coming from a science background, having studied physics, I just wondered if we could apply the same scientific rigor, the scientific method, if you will, that we do to experiments in other areas of life and medicine. What if we applied that same logic to skincare products that you can buy at the drugstore to see if they're actually working, test them like it's a science experiment with an app to see if is your skin actually changing, what are you using? But also for that discovery portion of, I want to find somebody else with skin like me, the same skin type, the same skin color, because that also matters when it comes to skincare, and see exactly what they are using. Not what an influencer is telling me to use, not what an influencer is using, but a real person with skin like me, and did it work for them? And do this at scale. So see for hundreds of people with skin like me what's actually working and what's not, and use that data as the basis of our recommendations, which is exactly what our company does.
I love the heart in all of your story and the fact that you combine it with the science. And as I will say, as a woman of color, I have always had this challenge. I've also had resonate with the acne in my teens, and also just not knowing what kind of skincare to do because my skin is darker, has pigment in it. So I love the ability to go into your app and say, like, the fact that when you first log in and it asks you the color, it's like, oh, this is something that knows what I need. And I loved that about that.
Thank you. And that's a really important part of it, not just from a consumer experience or from the recommendations, but actually from an even broader dermatology education perspective. One of the big problems actually in the healthcare systems is that in Western countries like the US and the UK, when dermatologists are going through their medical training and looking in their textbooks, seeing pictures of skin issues, those are very, very Caucasian dominated. Now, what that means in practice is that doctors will disproportionately misdiagnose people like you and I because they've had less exposure to even just seeing what the same skin concern looks like on skin of color. And so another quite large part of what we do is, I think maybe because I'm somebody that has skin of color that has built the app, our data set is actually very well represented across all of the different skin shades, which means that we have a partnership in place where we're providing obviously user consented anonymized images, but zoomed up pictures of the actual skin issue so that that can be used in dermatology education to help train the next generation of dermatologists to stop your children and my future children from, experiencing the same things that we have.
I love that. So I think, when you've built up this company over, I think you said the last 5 years, how has, like, from the beginning to where you are now evolved? And talk to us a little bit about the different phases that you've had so far.
Yeah, so my job today, the day-to-day, I would say actually looks more similar than in the early days as one would think. And I think a large reason for that is because I love to be very hands-on. Most founders at my stage would have hired more and delegated more, but I just love doing everything. And I think, on a very selfish note, one of my big motivators for picking this as my career path was the learning opportunity. I didn't think there was any other job that could teach me basically everything about everything. And so the fact that, the business challenges now are certainly different, and I'll talk a little bit about the different phases that we've gone through, but I'm still the one getting stuck in, getting my hands dirty, and I absolutely love that. I love that I'm still very much as involved with all of the different parts of the company as I was in the early days. Because again, a lot of people don't realize our team is just 2 of us full time still.
Wow.
And that means that I have to be more hands-on, and it's by design that I've structured it that way. But that said, I've always been very, very laser focused on what the company goals and needs are at any given time. So I would say that from month 0 to month 3, it was all around idea validation and assumptions testing. And so in those early days, the day-to-day of my job looked like scouring those Reddit threads I'd spent years on Facebook groups that I'd spent years on, just doing user interview after user interview with other skincare enthusiasts and learning more about why they've tried the products that they have, what their frustrations are, what sort of existing habit tracking apps they use, what some of their existing behaviors are. And so I spent 3 months very, very rigorously testing assumptions and tweaking the idea before writing a single line of code. And so, even from its inception, Clear was always going to be a tool to help people figure out which products to use and whether they were working. These are the problems I'd identified. But obviously the form of that solution is what iterates, because there is no market-leading skincare app. So there's no obvious feature set that we can just copy and paste and we know it's going to take off. You have to do that, long process of talking to people, analyzing the metrics, A/B testing features, and, iterating continuously. And so, month 0 to 3, as I said, in an attempt to save more time down the line, was let me validate as much as I possibly can without investing a single minute into writing any code. Because I think the worst thing you can do is just use all of your own assumptions, build something, and then you launch and then nobody wants it. I didn't want to make that mistake, so got to the point where I wasn't learning anything new from my user interviews. That was about month 3. Then I spent exactly 1 month writing code to build the very, very first MVP, which I soft launched to our beta community of those roughly 300 people that I'd been doing those user interviews with for the past 3 months. Got their initial feedback about what would make the app launchable, which ended up being another roughly month of writing code. So then again, I was heads down. My day-to-day was just writing code. And then it was June of 2021, about like 5 to 6 months in, that I finally launched the first public version of Clear. Then at that stage, I had just finished Y Combinator, and Y Combinator culminates in Demo Day, where companies will then go on and fundraise. And I knew that to, have the best chance of success with fundraising, the most traction I can get is the thing that I should be prioritizing. So I was doing every scrappy method of begging, pleading, trying to get users however I could, trying all sorts of incentive schemes, but constrained by budget because I wasn't yet ready to invest in marketing, which is a bit of a trend of mine. But I wanted to just try every hacky solution I could. I designed this get started as a skinfluencer program to take micro influencers. If they could bring 100 of their Instagram followers to Clear, we'd give them a verified badge on our platform, which, didn't cost us anything, but was a way for people to feel special. And so, I ran all sorts of experiments during that period. Then roughly September of 2021 was when YC Demo Day kicked off and my funding round started. At that stage, my job looked completely different. I'd gone from chasing micro-influencers on Instagram to 10 investor pitches a day. And that period lasted for about 3 months. And my one goal then was just to close the round. And then as soon as that round was closed, the next most important thing was to hire the right CTO. So then I went on that whole wild goose chase and hired in our now CTO, Charles, and he is the other full-time employee at Clear, and he's based in South Korea. And then from there, it was really about achieving certain product milestones. And as I alluded to very briefly earlier, there's no market-leading app in this space, which means that in order to build the best app, we have to just figure it out ourselves by continuously keeping up that release cadence. So then, honestly, Olivia, for the next 2.5 years, my job was just writing code, talking to users, analyzing the metrics, and continuously iterating. And it was like that until about a year ago, where we achieved a lot of those retention targets that we set out, which is great. And so my job then sort of focused more on the commercial side and the user acquisition side. So the past year, I've spent more of my time split between, opening up new revenue streams, both on the B2C and the B2B side, and also experimenting with some still zero budget, but marketing. So short form video content, trying to figure out what works, what sort of storyline, and building up some relationships to build up some good visibility. But, even today I was in the code base, so that's still not off the table. And ultimately my job is still to do whatever needs to be done. And so I still get to do pretty much everything.
That's incredible. I am blown away by the fact that there's just 2 of you right now and you've built up what you've built up.
Yeah,
So-
well, I think that sometimes there is this notion that more people equals more in general. And I did go through a phase between 2022 and 23 where I also wanted to optimize for speed. And I hired more people to the team. So, I'm not afraid of hiring, but I found that it slowed things down, just to be very, very blunt. And that could have been my mistakes with who I hired or the way that I went about hiring. But ultimately, the results weren't what I wanted. And I'm fortunate to have an absolutely fantastic CTO. And I think because I'm so disciplined and so driven to get my work done, that actually the 2 of us make a really great team. And I kind of almost don't subscribe to this belief that you need loads of capital and a huge team and hiring 1 million people a day to achieve unicorn status. I think actually if you stick to fundamentals, you keep the team lean and moving quickly, you can have really great outcomes. And I hope that our results prove that.
I love that. I think that there's a way of working that you're speaking to that the AI has actually unlocked. In some ways that more companies, it sounds like you started that philosophy and that principle from a place before AI kind of exploded. But I'm curious now, are there parts that you've pulled in that help you sustain this 2-person working model?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely with some low-hanging fruit bits like managing my email inbox, for example. I definitely use AI tools there to help just, when you have that writer's block, you've got 1 million emails to get through and you can get that first draft generated. You put your scrappy ideas down. That saves me time. When it comes to writing code, my CTO is not the biggest fan of the AI tools, but I'd say he's the more competent engineer between the 2 of us. So as a very mediocre software engineer, I love using any, AI assistants, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever it might be, not for complex tasks, but for simple programmatic tasks. It absolutely can speed things like that up. On the marketing side, for drafting text copy, for captions on social media, It takes the thought out of it. So I think that there are a lot of great productivity use cases for AI that have absolutely created more hours in the day. What I think is dangerous, though, is being overly reliant on it, which sounds like an obvious statement. And something I worry about, especially for the younger generation or, even kids at school or university, is losing the ability to think and problem solve, because that part of my job has not changed with AI. It's just the repetitive tasks, if you will, that have got a lot faster. But for any key company decisions or strategic planning or creative brainstorming, that's the part that it can't replicate well. And so long as, I think, for founders or just anybody who's interested in using AI, whether you run a company or not, I think it's good to have extreme clarity on where to use it and where not to use it. And I think we found quite a happy balance. I think it's also quite personal, depending on what your skill set and abilities are. But no, I'm a huge fan, and I think that from a pure productivity perspective, when used correctly, it's life changing.
Yeah. I love how you look at it, and the concept of knowing when to use it and when not is so important. It's one of the things that I'm constantly looking at my kids and trying to figure out, like, how do I make sure that you're using it when you're supposed to and not? Because you're right, it is part of the new generation. But coming back to Clear, what do you think are kind of, some of the philosophies that you've put in place that have helped you grow naturally? And when I say grow naturally, I'm talking about the company itself. Like what kind of, and it sounds like you have a lot of good insights into this, and I want to dive in a little bit more. But I'm curious, like, what are the foundational philosophies that you've put in place, or kind of beliefs in the company that you've put in place that you have seen have been influential and substantial in helping you guys grow?
Yeah, so I actually thought about this quite intentionally very early on, I'd say, for a startup, about thinking what are the company core values, which can seem a bit silly, especially when it's a team of two. But the reason I did this is because, all of my prior career experiences were in these very large organizations, and they had their company values, and it seemed very corporate. But also, I learned that it is much harder to change a bad culture than it is to just start with a good one. And so I have to be intentional. And I think even, I touched on it briefly then, but with some of the hiring mistakes I made, sometimes I indexed too heavily on the technical competency over the personality fit. And then I kind of swung the other way where, I loved the person, but the milestones were not being achieved. And I realized that having a very clear framework of not only the kind of person that would be a fit for us, but the kind of way that a person can thrive in their own career was very important to me. And I figured that it was worth laying those out with a lot of clarity. And so the most important sort of core value, if you will, is all around like working hard and working smart. So all of Clear's achievements have been achieved through hard work. And I really don't think that there is any shortcut to that. A lot of it is not glamorous. And I think sometimes when people think of starting a company, it's about, freedom from a boss, and I get to choose how I spend my day and my life. And I think the truth is you are now answerable to everybody. It's not just one boss. It's your customers, it's your investors, it's your team, it's literally everyone. And the level of responsibility is huge. And so I think the first thing is finding people who are very disciplined and want to work as well. People who are genuinely building from a place of passion and share that same sort of belief system where they believe that they have been given this skill set or education or background, and they want to do it to help other people. That is the most important thing I look for, because especially when putting a team together and creating the kind of company culture that I want, I don't want people showing up to this like it's just the job to pay the bills. Of course, practically it has to, but because we are a fully remote team, I'm not micromanaging, and I don't want to micromanage. I can't micromanage. And so I'm relying on a lot of trust, trusting that my teammates are doing their work and they are trusting that I am doing mine. And if you don't have that sort of discipline and ability to work hard, then this is not going to be the organization for you. But also, I don't believe in stupid hard work at all costs, or a FaceTime culture, or just sitting on your laptop awake because you know I'm awake and watching. And there was certainly some of that in some of the previous internships I did, which I also thought was pointless. If you're going to be at work, make it productive. Don't just come for the sake of it. And so leveraging tools that will make you more effective, which is why I'm the first person to say absolutely use LLMs if it's going to make you more productive. Use it in the right way to speed you up. If you are more productive at this hour that is not traditionally considered a working hour, go for it. As long as you are taking care of your health, of your close relationships. One of the beauties of remote working is you're not constrained to as rigid a structure. And I think one of the benefits of perhaps me starting this company so early on in my career was the fact that, yes, I had had these experiences in other organizations. I'd learned a bit about what I thought worked well and what I thought did not work well. But I wasn't very set in any particular way, and I didn't choose to do anything just because that's the way it's done. And I think it helps that both me and my CTO, we both come from a physics background. And so our approach to problem solving and just kind of critical thinking in general is always from a first principles approach, as opposed to this is what I have seen work well before in my experience, so let's do it. It's always about this is the problem at hand. How do we step by step solve it? And I think because of that, we work in ways that some people would consider non-traditional. And, you know, when he started at the company, his son was 16 months old, I think. And I always really admired that he's a very hands-on dad. I was not a parent. I'm still not a parent. But I also knew that just from a company values perspective, one day I want to be. So it is very important to me to create a company that is accommodating of that. So if he wants to work early in the morning and late at night to be able to spend the middle of the day with his kids, not only is that something that I will allow, that is something that I respect and admire and would encourage. And so I think just really looking at each person and making sure that they are taken care of holistically in their life, and also feeling a sense of ownership and motivation that's intrinsic and not coming because I am telling them to do something, but they understand why, which I think leads to like the kind of the other core pillar of the company, which is all about clarity and transparency in the communication. I mean, the company is called Clear, so you'd hope there was transparency, and that's built into the product, you know, and how you get your recommendations. It's all about adding transparency to this very opaque industry. But even with how I manage the team, I've always been very upfront about things like revenue, about how much funding is raised, about what our runway is, so that any deadlines that are being applied, it's not some sort of arbitrary deadline. It's that, no, the reason that this exists is because of XYZ, or this is exactly how much cash is in the bank. And it's not to scare anybody, but it's just to make sure that I'm kind of being radically transparent, because that's how I like to operate best. And especially when you're surrounded by people that you trust and that you respect, I think more heads solving complex problems is better than one head solving complex problems. So I think these are sort of the key things, that just trust, discipline, and transparency are sort of the most important values.
I love that you started thinking about the values so early on. And because from being at Airbnb, that was one of the things that I enjoyed most about the company, was that everyone had the same values. We had the same belief system, and it was something that everyone breathed. And it really made a difference when you worked in there, when you stepped into the room, you were all thinking and moving in the same direction. And I think it's really interesting to hear you talk, that you said, I knew this had to be in place first, so I didn't have to correct the culture. And I think that's phenomenal that you thought of that from the very first part in the inception of your company. So kudos to you, because I feel like that, to me, that is really one of the things that I learned at Airbnb that builds iconic brands, is that everyone doing the same thing, looking at the same thing, and understanding and observing that this is the picture we're all going for. This is what we really are all looking towards and working towards. So I think that, your thoughts on hiring are very interesting as well. Like that, it sounds like when you're hiring someone, you're really looking at them and saying, you're going to meet the values and the culture of this company, or you're not. And even though I like you as a person, it might not work out. Is there any stories that you can kind of give us in hiring that would be interesting to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can talk about many hiring stories actually. But I think one that was actually quite illustrative of the importance of culture was one of the best engineers I've hired as far as technical competency went. I was so blown away by just how good he was, how impressive he was. But from the very start, he had been unsure about remote working, and he hadn't hid that during the application process or the interviews. And I'd seen it as more of a minor thing at the time of, he has a preference for being around people, but he said he's open to remote working. And the more that we worked together, the more that I saw the impact of our remote setup having on him personally, in the sort of more mental health side effects of not seeing people every day, not having that lunchtime chit chat. And although I do things like team socials and, we have a daily stand up where we make sure we see each other at least on video call, I appreciate it's not the same as being in an office. And, I'm surrounded by my family I'm very close with my partner who I'm very close with. All of our other employees at the time also were living with family. This guy was by himself. And seeing the impacts of that on his work ended up being the reason that we had to part ways, because that setup just didn't work for him, because it created all these other issues of, number one, having that discipline. He needed someone, that structure to say, these are the hours that you're working at, these are the check-ins that we have. He needed that face-to-face connection to sort of feel seen and heard. Another big thing that I stress a lot internally is communication. Because we're remote, I encourage everybody to over-communicate, put everything on Slack. If you spend more than 20 minutes solving a technical bug, just post that you're trying to solve it on Slack, because somebody else might be able to help you. And then even if you figure it out 5 minutes later, you just put an update. Say, oh, actually, guys, I figured it out. No worries. He struggled with over-communicating like that. And so what started as a very minor negative, maybe, he didn't like the remote setup, which isn't a negative to him as a person. Some people like it, some people don't. Ended up being the reason that he was not a fit for the company, both from a productivity perspective, but also from a happiness perspective. And that then changed my sort of rigidity to the value system, because I realized that even if it's something that doesn't make them a bad person, doesn't make them a bad hire, if they do not tick these certain boxes, no matter how competent they are or how well-intentioned they are, this will not be the company for them. This will not be the environment in which they thrive. And I truly believe that Clear is the kind of environment where certain people will thrive, because there is so much freedom. Everyone is encouraged to speak up. I have very little to no hierarchy. Even if you're an intern joining for a week, if you don't like something in the app, there is a dedicated Slack channel to tell us that and to flag these sorts of issues. And so, I have quite a clear image in my mind of what makes somebody succeed at Clear. And even though the core team is small, every summer since our inception, we have taken on anywhere between 15 to 30 interns, aged 16 to 21 roughly. And that's sort of separately because I have a lot of thoughts around education and how entrepreneurship is taught and young people opportunities when it comes to entrepreneurship. So I have managed much larger teams. I'm currently managing a small army at the moment. And again, it's now taken 5 years, but even in the summer intern hiring process, I know what to look out for and what not to look out for. And so, even with that, somebody who's just doing it to pay the bills or put it on their CV, they're not going to thrive in an environment like this, because I am not going to direct every little aspect. They're going to have freedom. And the types of people that will succeed in my company are the types of people that are unafraid to speak on their ideas and actually try and bring them to life. I will support them however I can. But those that need a lot of hand holding or micromanagement or anything like that. Not to say they're a bad employee. There will be plenty of organizations in which they will thrive at with that sort of attitude and approach. But knowing that that is not our company, I think is really, really important for both sides, both to protect the company and also for individuals making their own career choices.
And how do you know, like when you're sitting with someone for an interview, how do you define in that moment or through that process if they're going to meet the culture values of Clear, if they're going to understand the type of work and how you want them to work and the discipline style that you need? How do you assess that?
So I like to ask them about their life, maybe questions that are, I don't want to use the word intrusive because that sounds terrifying, but I ask personal questions to try and really get to grips with how they think and how they solve problems and how they approach other areas of their life. Especially because so frequently I'm interviewing very young candidates who may not have a ton of professional experience. I'm interested in what their passions are. What have they started? Have they started any club or society at their school? Are they part of a sports team where they have to wake up at 5 a.m. every day and show up? These are, to me, great indicators of discipline, of resilience. If they're the kind of person that has taken something from 0 to 1, even just a school project, I'm interested in hearing about that way more than, maybe for a full-time hire, someone who has gone to a top university and perhaps got the top grades. Not to say they're a bad candidate, but equally, that in itself, to me, does not signal competency. Even the university you went to, that was another mistake I think I made very early on, because I had come from all these banking internships where they're very strict on which university you came from. They pay a lot of attention to your grades. So for my first couple of hires, that was the thing that I thought, I should probably care about that. And I very quickly realized that there is almost no correlation with the university you went to and the grade you achieved to your technical competency. And then that makes sense. Your ability to sit a maths exam once a year is very different from how you show up day to day and, cold emailing people and pitching a company and doing all the rest. And so I think it's what I'm looking for is really a track record of going above and beyond and a track record of curiosity and wanting to learn. Those are the kinds of people that do best at Clear because they're willing to be open to new experiences. They're willing to ask questions. I also invest quite heavily on my side in learning opportunities. So I will do an insight talk every week on basically whatever they want me to talk about. And I mean, the one this week, for example, was about how to break into investment banking because some of them are at the age where they are considering completely different career paths. And I talk a lot about startups and they're getting the startup experience. So just for those that were interested in something completely different, I'm open to sharing whatever experience I can to help them at the end of the day make the most informed decision as it pertains to their own careers. And so, yeah, I think it's sort of a general attitude. It's an outlook on life. It's about showing that they can be a person that is resilient, someone that's not easily fazed by challenges, that in fact somebody that expects challenges because they like to do hard things. And then also, this is hard to, I think, set a framework for, but just nice people. When you're working with a small team, I think who you're working with is really important. And I'm not saying that I like to have the exact same kind of person. I don't need to tell you how important diversity is on a team. I do think a shared values system is important, but I actually love hearing from people with different life experiences, born and raised in different countries, different religious backgrounds, even different political beliefs. I think it's great to have insights from all sorts of people, often who you disagree with. But if you're able to understand why they hold the beliefs that they do is the important thing. So another thing I look for is just the communication. Can they articulate why they do the things that they do? And if they can, then I know I stand to learn something from them as well. And they'd be a good fit for the team.
Incredible. I love that response. And I feel like as you were talking, I was uncovering things and learning with what you're saying. And in ways that I didn't expect with that answer. Okay. You had my brain thinking of like, I'm like, this is, I resonate with so much what you said, but I also was like, I love what you said about what you look for. My mother brain went off like, oh, I better make sure my kids can do that.
I'm sure
But
with you as their mother, you have nothing to be worried about.
oh, but the thing is that worry is what drives the process, the thoughts, right? Um, and I think that with what you've said and what you've shared with us, one of the things, the undertone of what I've gathered from you is the intentionality behind everything that you've done in every phase that you've had. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're really looking at the phase of the company and understanding what it needs before you're taking action.
Mhm.
And I think that that's so important. Even from the beginning, you said, I was doing user research and user interviews and understanding my customer before I wrote a line of code.
Yeah.
And I feel like I want to frame that quote because a lot of people dive in and they just start building, especially with AI now. You can build, 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 build. But what you can't do is put that front thought process in of like, why am I building what I'm building and how should I build it? And
Mhm.
is this something customers are actually going to want? So I
Yeah.
love the thought process behind how you did that.
Thank you.
And it sounds like you're doing so many things from, from end to end, from, building your company and doing all of the interviews and with Clear and hiring. And I want to try to change a little bit of the what we're speaking about and talk about you and like how do you do everything that you're doing. And you also often talk about health and maintaining your health. Like, can you
Mhm.
tell us how do you do that? How do you do what you're doing in your day life? Make your
Yeah.
company successful and then also take care of yourself.
Yeah, well, I think that the two questions are very interlinked because the honest answer is that for the first 2.5 years, um, I did everything at the cost of my health. I did not take care of my health at all. I worked weekends, evenings, didn't take a single holiday. Um, and it's very easy to criticize my past self and say like, oh, she should have taken better care of herself and paid more attention to her health. But I think we shouldn't also trivialize how challenging it is to start a business, how challenging it is to, raise funding, for example. It's easy now to say, oh, you shouldn't have slept at 2 a.m., 22-year-old Ahana. But at the same time, most of the investors were in San Francisco. I was in London just during COVID. If the Zoom pitch is at 2 a.m., what am I going to do? And so, I don't like to glamorize hustle culture, but I also like to be very honest that it is hard. This is a hard career path and there is a lot of hard work. Um, and what I realized in those first 2.5 years I think that was probably the most ups and downs, and when most companies will face a tremendous amount of instability, um, is that through all of those challenges, I actually absolutely love this job. And I think I touched on it right before we hit record, but um, when I made this career decision, a large part of it was I wanted to optimize for learning. I knew that for me in my 20s, the thing that matters most to me is as long as I have financial independence, so I can afford to pay my own rent and my bills, I don't actually really care that much about buying a house or buying a car. I mean, I still need to learn to drive, which is a separate issue, but I didn't have any of those milestones as such. It was more about as long as I'm not dependent on my parents, the thing that I want to do is learn as much as I possibly can. And when I looked, every day at my founder journey, even on the worst day, if I had all 10 investor pitches go terribly, I would always ask myself, would I have preferred to have taken the other path, taken my banking job? And the answer was no, because even with those 10 failed pitches, I learned so much every single day. And again, as I said before, with this job, it's not just pitching, it's not just tech, it's not just hiring. I get to learn about absolutely everything. And I realized I love that. Like, I want this to be my job for a long, long time. But separately, I felt that I'm probably not going to be here for a long, long time if I keep living this way, because at that time, I was not sleeping. Most of the time, I would finish my meetings at about 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And this was sort of one of maybe the downsides of remote working. I had this mindset of if I was a banker, I'd be working round the clock anyway. My team is remote. I will be available literally whenever they want. They're the ones with the families and the kids. I am young. I can outwork everyone else. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage. And maybe that did benefit me in the early days. I don't know. But to give you a picture, you know, I would sleep at 2, 3 a.m. My sleep would always break at about 4:30 in the morning, and I would like panic check my emails. And then if I had to like respond, I would. And if I didn't, then I would go back to sleep. And then because of my teammates in Asia, the day would start fairly early again at about 7. And I would just work. I would literally sit at my desk. And this is sort of both my biggest superpower and my worst enemy, is that I can actually very comfortably sit at this desk for 16 hours, not move, and stay focused. And I think I abused that. I used it way too much. So I would literally schedule every single meeting back to back between I'd be writing lines of code. And I would get a lot done, sure. But what I found is that I was actually falling ill, like quite often. And it was nothing serious, but I was just constantly getting colds. And that would knock me out for about a week at a time. And it's sad to admit, but it was actually from a productivity perspective. I was like, gosh, what can I do to be more productive? Taking these weeks off for like my illness would probably let me do more work. Why am I falling ill all the time? And then I looked at all my habits and I thought, well, probably eating junk all the time, not sleeping, not moving a muscle is contributing to my immune system essentially not working. And as I said, if I want to do this for the long haul, which I do, I've realized that there is no HR team that is checking if I'm taking my holiday or if I'm eating fruits and vegetables. It's literally my responsibility to take care of that, especially because our team is so small. If I am not here tomorrow, what happens to the company? And the answer then, and to an extent now, is still the company will not survive. So I have to take care of myself. And I think it started as I just viewed it as my job, that from this point, it is my part of my CEO responsibilities is I have to take care of my health. And when I commit to something, I tend to commit to it fairly seriously. The flip side of that, there is, I have actually always loved like sport and fitness. As a child, I was a gymnast. So I used to train a lot for that. Then during high school, I played football, I played touch rugby, and I always loved that. I used to go to the gym every day, I think in grade 11 and 12 with my friends after school. So it always actually been like quite a big part of my identity. But when I went to university, I was so focused on my academics and my career that that's all I optimized for. I really did not make time for my fitness in particular. And so I just started just going to the gym regularly. And I'm very, very fortunate that nearby where I live, there's an amazing gym community. There's classes included. And, you know, I think having other people there that I got to see every day, having amazing trainers, really motivated me. Because after all those years of not exercising, I still had some underlying strength from all those years ago of being an athlete as a child. And so I absolutely just fell back in love with the gym probably about a year and a half ago now. And as I said, I take my fitness, my sleep, my diet as seriously as I take my work. It's all in the calendar. Everything is scheduled. My time to meal prep is scheduled. My time to sleep, I actually try to schedule it and try and stick to it as much as I possibly can. My workouts, like my runs, everything is scheduled so that when I start my week, I'm just on autopilot in the same way that I know I have this meeting, this recording, this, you know, focused work time. This is my lunchtime workout. This is my evening run, whatever it might be. And it has made me so much happier, probably because it's regulated my hormones. It's fixed my immune system, but it's also made me feel like a more whole person in a way, because now I don't just work. I work and I work out.
You're like, those are the things I do. I work and I work out. I love it. I love that you're taking care of yourself. I do think there's a time and place for hustle, especially, you know, as you're building something formative. Like sometimes you do have to give up a little bit of that time. I wonder if there is some time that you can just not do that. Like if there is a possibility to hustle and still take care of yourself. Even in those early days, I wonder if you could have went back and still done it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to say. And I also think different things work for different people. You know, there's no one route to success. And even when it comes to, you know, earlier you said that everything I do is intentional. And that's so true. Like I am a planner to the T. I will make sure that I have thought about everything. Some founders are much more go with the flow, like whatever opportunity comes, jump at it, which can also totally work. And so I think there are some people for whom not hustling as hard, not taking the same extreme sacrifices probably does work. But at the same time, you know, I can't go and change the past. And I think fortunately I was self-aware soon enough that I didn't cause any permanent long-term damage to my health, which was something else I was worried about because I was 23 when I had this revelation of I am too young to feel this way and I am too young to be living like this. While I am still young and still have my peak fitness years ahead of me, I want to make the most of that. And so, you know, I tried to not live with regrets. At the time I was acting in accordance with all the information I had at that time. Now, as I have learned new information, I changed my behaviors and I'm happy with my current behaviors.
That's good. As is becoming more wise. Say as you get older, you experience more things. You become more wise, even though it still sounds old. But you just gather experiences and you change your perception based on the things you've experienced.
Yeah.
Now I want to change threads one more time and just ask you real quick some really quick questions. So one is, what's one book that has changed how you've looked at either how you built your company or how you look at being a leader?
This is a really cliche answer, but it's Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I think I read it in my second year of uni, but I absolutely love it. And I think it puts success into such great context and talks about all the factors so well. So I'd have to pick that one.
I love that. What's one product that you're using right now that you love?
Can Clear be my answer?
Yeah, yes.
Best skincare app on the App Store. If I'm not allowed to say my own app as the product, then I would say that you can see all of the skincare products that I use on my app to figure out what my favorites are.
Okay. I'm going to have to check that out. What's one ritual you do every day that keeps you sane?
Exercise, some sort of physical activity.
And you just recently ran a marathon?
A half marathon.
It has the word marathon in it, okay? To me, it's still...
To be fair, that was my half marathon race was 2 months ago, but actually this weekend, so 3 days ago, it's the context is that it's my last week of being 25 years old. I turned 26 on Monday, and I wanted to run 25 kilometers as an homage to my age. So I ran 25K on Sunday.
Nice.
But yeah, I like to do a little something every day, and I do have a couple more races coming up, which I need to start training for.
I love it. Tell us one thing that you would recommend to others going through the investor phase where they're looking for funding.
I think it would be to expect it to not feel very fun. To be honest, like any sales process will contain a lot of rejection and you will hear everything wrong with you and your company. That is a reflection of fundraising being hard, not you being bad. It can be very easy to take negative feedback personally, especially when you're building a company and it is your baby. It's a reflection of you and your work. But yeah, if you're finding it challenging, it's testament to the fact that it is. And you're supposed to find it hard, not the fact that you should stop and give up.
I love that answer. So I'm going to ask the last question here. And I love this question because, you know, I think about we think a lot at Babco about building things that are iconic, building companies that are iconic. And being iconic doesn't mean that you are iconic now. You can feel iconic through the process, right? Because people think iconic, Apple's iconic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you're building something, you kind of feel it. And I know you do this. And with Babco, I was like, I'm building something incredible. And there was a moment that hit me. Is there a moment for you that you knew you were building something iconic with Clear?
I think it was when the frequency of direct messages I'd get on my personal Instagram from strangers skyrocketed about feedback from the app. For so long, all of those initial downloads literally came through me begging and pleading for my friends, my family members, asking them to like plug it. And so I know how hard I had to work for those initial downloads and that initial traction. And I also know all the things that I set out to do in that vision. And in those early days when I'd pitch investors and I would say, we are going to help people figure out the products to use and whether they're working, we're going to build a wholesome community. And I'd be faced with questions like, well, why would anyone post in your community? Why will they share their pictures on your platform? You know, like, do they even need this? And I think it's a little bit of an I told you so chip on shoulder mentality, but, you know, seeing people that feel strongly enough about their experience through the app, whether it's the community, whether it's a specific product recommendation, seeing that it's worked for them, it's helped them, and they have then felt compelled enough to find my private social media to send a message expressing their gratitude means the world. And I think that that ultimately is the thing that is most rewarding about being a founder, is getting to see that impact of your work so directly. And so I think, yeah, just seeing that I am delivering on what I set out to do, in spite of some people believing that that wouldn't be possible, is just the most amazing feeling. Makes me feel iconic. I love that word.
I love it too. Ahana, this has been such a pleasure. And I uncovered so many more hidden gems from you along this journey. And I would love to stay in touch and just continue. Obviously, I'm going to keep looking at your Instagram or your LinkedIn posts.
Thank you. And likewise.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And we will see you more soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ahana. Lovely to chat with you too. Bye.
Bye.